Well, I'm a pilot. I've got 1,000 hours of flight time and an instrument rating, and there's an awful lot about flying I know about. And one of the things I like most about flying is the vernacular. There's some interesting little expressions. And one of the ones that I think is absolutely best is when somebody dies in aviation, we say that they've flown west. Turns out that Chuck Yeager is just recently flown west, and wherever everybody goes when they fly west, Yeager's going to get there ahead of all of them, even though they may have started decades ahead of him, because Chuck Yeager is flying west at supersonic speeds. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is a special edition memorial right angle for the passing of Chuck Yeager, whose importance goes way beyond the fact that he was, in fact, the first man to break the sound barrier. For those of you not familiar with this story, The Right Stuff, the novel is extremely good. The movie's very good as well. Steve, there's an awful lot about Chuck Yeager that is really remarkable in terms of what I consider to be sort of the ideal American character. Chuck Yeager, during World War II, became an ace in a day, had 5 kills in a single flight. That's what they call an ace in a day. I think one of the most impressive things that I ever heard Chuck Yeager say was back when he was flying his P-51 Mustangs towards the end of the war and the Germans were coming out with their Me-262 jets. Chuck Yeager once said, "The first time I ever saw a jet, I shot it down." That's about as an American response to a Nazi miracle weapon as I could possibly imagine. There's a whole discussion to be had about that. But Chuck Yeager apparently was not too intimidated by Nazi super weapons.
No, he wasn't intimidated by much. I was my introduction to Chuck Yeager was through the book The Right Stuff that Tom Wolfe wrote. I'm not even sure when he wrote it, but I know my mom was a huge Tom Wolfe fan, and she had me read From Outhouse to Bauhaus, and then The Right Stuff in that order when I was, I want to say 12 or 13 years old. And as fine a writer as Tom Wolfe is, one of the best American writers of the 20th century, I don't think anybody would dispute that. There was something about Sam Shepard's on-screen portrayal
Absolutely right.
of Yeager.
He was more Yeager than Yeager was. Yeah. Absolutely.
There was something about that performance that, and I didn't see the movie for a couple of years after I'd read the book, and I'd kind of forgotten about the books. I was probably a little young to have read it that first time when I was 13. But by the time I was in high school, 16, 17 years old, watching that movie, you wanted to be that guy. First of all, he shows up at this dusty bar in that leather jacket and picks up Barbara Hershey. Now, who doesn't want to do that? Of course, it turns out they were already married, but that's not the point. The point is this guy's going home with Barbara Hershey. And then the second or third time you see him, he's out with her. They're riding horses. He falls. He breaks a rib, a couple of ribs, and goes on to become the first human being to break the sound barrier the next day. He couldn't even close the damn hatch on the Bell X plane. He had to. I mean, his whole thing with the broken ribs was to go to a crewman. You think you could rig me up a handle so I could close that door without having to stretch my arm too much?
He could not move his arm enough to secure the latch, and he had Ripley, his flight engineer, sawed a broomstick handle off about that big and allowed him to wedge itself in there. So think about that, folks. You're in an airplane that you can't get out of, and you're not going to miss that opportunity, despite the fact that broken ribs are about the most painful thing you can experience.
Yeah, just a hell of a guy. Well, a hell of a pilot. In person, of course, apparently wasn't that great a guy. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is the one thing the movie did better than the book, other than Sam Shepard's portrayal of Yeager, was the director, whose name escapes me, is Philip Kaufman, maybe? I can't remember, struck this brilliant balance between the heroism of the pilots and the astronauts, whether they were down in Florida or out at Edwards, their heroism with the absurdity of a government program, any government program, even one as noble as Mercury or Gemini or Apollo. It's going to be absurd. And what really brought Chuck Yeager's character to life for me was in that contrast, because the Mercury astronauts were among the best test pilots, the best pilots that this country had ever produced. But the program turned them into what they called themselves spam in a can. They weren't piloting anymore. They were sitting on top of a controlled explosion and kind of along for the ride. And at the end of the movie, when they juxtapose these amazing pilots turned spam in a can, watching Sally Rand do her famous striptease down in Texas with
one of my favorite moments ever in movies, ever.
With Chuck Yeager. They keep cutting back and forth between that big show that LBJ put on for the Mercury astronauts in Texas, with Just Another Day for Chuck Yeager going out there, getting on board another experimental plane and breaking another damn record, and then just going back home to Barbara Hershey at night. That's a hell of a thing.
Scott, one of the things that Tom Wolfe points out in The Right Stuff, and is absolutely true, is that Yeager's impact on aviation is so much more than the fact that he just happened to be the guy who broke the sound barrier. All the heroism involved with that and the broken ribs and all of that aside, his record was broken, I suppose, just less than a year later, or certainly not much longer than that. And then they just continued to go faster and faster and faster. But there was something about Yeager that Wolfe said all pilots aspired to, and I can speak from experience here. When I get on the radio, when I got on the radio anyway, when I was flying, I would always find that my voice would drop a significant amount, and I'd put a little bit of a drawl in there, and every single pilot I ever heard did that too. Wolfe pointed out that pilots made an attempt to even sound like him, that there was something about the fact that he rode horses and that he was slow speaking. He very nearly didn't get the X-1 flight because he didn't have a college degree. He only had a high school degree. That's what kept him out of the astronaut corps. And there's something about Yeager that is kind of such an iconic American thing. I guess what I'm asking you, Scott, is on some level, it's almost like the sound barrier was broken by an actual honest to God cowboy. And I'm very grateful that the guy who influenced all of our radio communications had a West Virginia drawl, and it wasn't, John Oliver who broke the sound barrier, because then we would all sound like idiots.
There are people who live their lives in such a way that they become an avatar for an ethos. They represent something that's so much bigger than themselves that, as Steve said, I don't want to even talk about any personal peccadillos of the man, because he established a figure, as James Earl Jones said in Field of Dreams. He became a figure of something so much bigger than himself that even, like, both of you guys are space geeks and science fiction geeks and really into airplanes, and you know all the names of all these things. I don't, but I'll tell you, I knew who Chuck Yeager was. Yeah. I was not old enough to be paying attention to the news when he was doing his most significant work. But I knew who Chuck Yeager was. And when I saw the headline in the newspaper, I felt something because I knew who Chuck Yeager was. And in a sense, he represented not just an accomplishment, but a time and a way of living and a kind of American that is, not just a tough SOB, but somebody who is willing to push the limits and then get hurt doing it and then push it even further, and wouldn't think of being cheated out of a moment of pushing the limits just by something like a cracked rib. And if you've ever had a cracked rib, you know that every breath is agony. That is something that will endure. And very few people will have the ability to mourn the actual man, Chuck Yeager. Very few people will have known him on a personal level and be able to, relate what kind of a guy he was. But I think, in a sense, the whole country mourns his passing, in the sense that, wow, what a great time that was. What a great idea that was. And I hope a whole new generation of young people draws inspiration from people like him, and people, frankly, like Elon Musk and the people who are involved in the SpaceX program, and the Burt Ruttans of the world, and even Jeff Bezos in the Blue Origin kind of activity that he's engaged in. There's a generation coming up that says, yeah, let's push it. Let's go for it. Let's do it. And those people are getting an education right now as they read these stories about the passing of Chuck Yeager that I think will serve them well as they start living out the dreams of Elon Musk.
There are a lot of things that I don't know the inside story on. I couldn't tell you anything about cooking or gardening or anything else like that. But this particular subject is something I know something about from the inside. Tom Wolfe and the really remarkable 1980 movie, The Right Stuff, was called The Right Stuff. And really the question that not many people ask, and which both the book and the movie tried to get to, is what is the right stuff? Wolfe says that the Mercury astronauts had it and that Chuck Yeager had it. There's no question Neil Armstrong had it, and virtually every astronaut had it. What is it? What is it? Well, this is something, as I say, I know a little bit about. First of all, it's astonishing levels of intelligence, not intellectualism, genuine intelligence, in order to survive these experiences. And many men didn't. But in order to survive them, one of the things you have to do is you have to know enough of engineering to know what the hell is going on in that aircraft of yours all the time. This is completely overlooked by just about everybody, is just how blindingly intelligent these people are and were and continue to be. The second part of the right stuff equation is courage. As is pointed out in both the book and the movie, for maybe a decade there at Edwards Air Force Base, test pilots had a 25% chance of not coming back from a first flight in an experimental aircraft type. That's, you fly that, 25% one mission, you fly two missions, it's 50%, you fly four. Statistics and probably don't actually work that way, but you can get a pretty good idea of just exactly how dangerous this was. So getting into an airplane that's going to do something like that is a courageous act. But I think the single great quality of the right stuff is your ability to control your emotions when your emotions are most running rampant. Yeah. It's that nerves of steel, ice water in the veins. It's the ability to shut down the fear. And I've had 3 engine failures in my life in a single engine airplane, and I can tell you that every one of them is they command your full attention, let's put it that way. And for me, I could feel those little red-eyed rat of panic gnawing at my ankles, and then something happened, and I switched the lever, and I just said, okay, you're a glider pilot. You can land an airplane without an engine. You've done it hundreds of times before. It's the ability to simply turn off your emotions when your emotions are screaming the loudest. I learned to fly in gliders, and I learned to fly in the Mojave Desert. And it was my great, great honor and privilege to solo on the 4th of July in the same skies that Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in. I was in exactly the same, you just point over there, and there it was. My flight instructor told me many stories, and several of them had to do with Yeager, and I don't know how precisely true this is, but this is why Yeager is important. Walking out to the glider one day, my flight instructor said, Bill, when you get in trouble up there, your reptile brain is going to take over, and my job is to make sure the reptile knows what to do. And when we were talking about stories like this, he told me a story about Yeager who found himself in a flat spin that he could not recover from. And the aircraft was simply uncontrollable and heading down to the earth. And as I heard the story, what Yeager did was he said, after the fact, he said, I didn't know I couldn't get the airplane out of the spin. I didn't know how to get it out of a flat spin. But I thought I could get the plane inverted. I thought I could get it upside down. And I know how to get out of an inverted spin. And my instructor told me this story, and I just looked at him in awe, and he said, there's always a way. There's always a way out. Always. Fight it all the way down. Don't ever give up. There's always a way out. Yeager understood that in order to make this better, I had to make it worse. And I thought, my God, what a man. The great line in The Right Stuff is uttered repeatedly by Gordon Cooper, who's played by Dennis Quaid. And that line is, who's the best pilot you ever saw? Who's the best pilot you ever saw? Chuck Yeager is not the best pilot I ever saw. Best pilot I ever saw, who I met once very briefly before he went west, was his friend Bob Hoover. Bob Hoover's the best pilot I ever saw. But Chuck Yeager is iconic. He's iconic in the way that Clint Eastwood is iconic. There's every single thing about the profession of flying is concentrated and encapsulated in that man. And as I said, he's flying west along with the rest of us. I'll be flying west someday. He's going to be there waiting for us on the ground because he's going to get there faster than any of us because he's Chuck frickin' Yeager. That's why. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. We'll see you next week on Right Angle.